just before we start, that was just a bit of inquiry. Most of today's session isn't about a specific platform. I might refer to a platform just for the sake of having an example, but what we're talking about today is all works on all platforms. It's just sometimes it's easier to refer to a specific case. So anyway, welcome. It's 5 past, so we'll get started. So first things first, my name is Jordan. I'm here with my colleague Sam. You'll hear his voice. You want to say hello, Sam?
Oh, hello. Yes,
Um,
I'm Sam.
Anytime you want to jump in, just let me know. As we go through, you'll learn a few more protocols and things that perhaps you could use in your classroom. But other than that, you can just, I assume, follow along. Hello, Jackie. Welcome to the session. So, today's topics are we're going to go over effective communication to students and getting into the class. What preparation you will need to do to make your first class go smoothly. Lesson plan. I have one prepared to show you. First time in online and exploring the tools. It's more of an example of a lesson plan that you might use, and then one that you could use to take away. And then tips on ensuring teachers and learners feel comfortable in the space. So, can I just ask you a favor, Paul? I'm getting some feedback from your mic. Can I get you to mute yourself? Thank you. And when you want to talk, you can just unmute. Or I can assist. Okay. Thank you, Paul. I think you are muted now. Or I can do it. Anyway, moving on. So first things first is I'm going to start with where it actually starts, is preparing the families for the idea of online lessons. So this is something that you'll have to do before you can even start, is preparing the families. So I would discuss maybe there's anyone here from primary school? Can I just get a bit of a feel? Are you primary or secondary? Because some of these tips will be a bit more applicable to primary school. Secondary, thank you, Rosalie. CHD, oh, it's D, thank you. Secondary. Seems we have quite a few secondary. Thank you. Ooh. Okay. All right, well, I'll still go through the tips anyway, because if you've got year 7s or 8s, these will definitely be applicable to you anyway. You might want to discuss having someone assist younger students for their first lesson at home, and younger students might need someone to be there every lesson if your school also does primary. You want to provide step-by-step connection instructions well before the first lesson. I do think that parents like to review them and then they get in contact with you beforehand, and that can really make things smoother on the first day instead of 40 teachers or 40 parents contacting you. Similar to what I tried to model for this session is letting students know that if they are scared about technical issues, they should join 30 minutes earlier. And that's because essentially if all the students show up on time and then all have technical issues, essentially your whole class won't work. So it's good to set down perhaps a rule. If you're worried about the technical issues, show up 30 minutes early and I'll help you. But if you show up on the bell and it's not all working, hello. If you show up on the bell and it's not all working, then perhaps you just have to join in on the next class, because you obviously can't sacrifice a whole class when a student's microphone and webcam is not working. Obviously, running a parent session before you start your first class can be a good way to perhaps get the parents to know about the tools and how to help their student when they call them or they call them over and say, I'm in a huge bother. Hello, Colossa. Welcome. Okay. Is there any questions on that, or would you like to move on? I'll take the silence as no. Okay. So preparing students. So the thing is that students will show up at the first lesson full of nerves and excitement, and taking 10 seconds to remind them this is a class and not a chat with their friends. So this is my tip for younger students, works really great with 7s and 8s, is that when they show up and they're all on webcam, often what I get them to do is I say, it's time to put your class hat on, and I put a hat on myself, like a pretend hat. Then I hand them a hat, and on their webcams, they all put their class hat on. It could just be a bit of interactivity on around that. And also, I guess, bring it back to, we're in class now. It's not, if that makes sense. Also, some students are particularly nervous about being called out. And if you have a student that you think is shy, talking to them about using talking to them about this, and sometimes I use a little tool where if you put your name, so I'm going to write it in the chat. So if I put, for example, Jordan and an asterisk, so what you might want to do is talk to your students about if this is a rule you want to implement in your class, where the asterisk means that you're a student who's participating and following along, but may not want to be called up, because it is a bit of a different feeling of the students, because whenever you call them, they're always the one at the front of the class. There are some students who are a bit shy and feel a bit intimidated when all of a sudden they're the one being called on. So yeah, I would recommend, if you have students that you think might fit into that boat, talk with them or talk with the whole class about using this asterisk. Okay. And I would say practice chat commands, and can be good to give students a hard copy. So I'm just going to load up. So on our website, I've put it into resources if you would like to access later. But I have this emoji code. So I have one in color and one in black and white. But the way that we use this is, for example, if the student says a word, so for example, if they say the word wave, it's like they're saying the emoji, because obviously your platform probably won't have emojis built in, but sometimes the text can replace the emoji and also give those students a bit of a chance to express themselves a bit more scaffolded. So, just typing the word hand up means I've got my hand up. Some of the ones that we use the most are yes, or Y and N. Also, things like clap. I think clap is a really great one, where if students just write the word clap into chat, that means they're clapping for their classmate who might have just shared or might have done something that was brave, like, for example, put their work onto the screen. And also can help students who, for example, might be a bit less inclined to understanding the social context of some of the interactions online. So really breaking them down can be a benefit for those students. So this, if you want this, it's on the website. Just go and find it over here. I'll get a link at the end for you if you need help to get that. Okay, so what presentation will you need to do to make your first, or what preparation will you need to do to make your first class go smoothly? So you can't imagine, like, as much as it seems obvious, sometimes it just needs to be spelt out. When students show up to an online classroom, it's going to be really slow. The first lesson, at least, maybe 2, maybe 3, need to be on how do you use the online class. And you can't expect them to show up and just automatically know all the tools. I would set aside in your teaching plan 2 or 3 lessons just to work with every tool, make sure they understand it before you use it in the learning context. And prepare your lessons to move really slow. And set fewer learning goals than your normal classroom. It will take students will go through things a lot slower, because you do have to remember that those students who usually don't really understand your instructions but look over their friend's shoulder, they won't have that friend's shoulder to look over. So you need to give them a chance to at least ask the question and say, I need that help again. And if you're using slides, use big fonts, not many words. I tried to model that here. That way, that don't put too much stuff on your slides. Even this, I'd say, is probably a year 8 or a 9 level. I wouldn't put this many words for a student who was younger than that. And remember that you're learning too, and you're problem solving. And when you're acting calm about the problems, you're modeling that for the students, because it's not really if the students will have a problem, it's when they will have a problem. So my just advice is, if you're trying to fix something, don't just like mute and try to fix it. Just let the students know I'm currently in the middle of fixing a problem, and that I'm not panicking as I do that. Part 2 of this is once the students become more confident in the space, their behavior does change. You'll have to start thinking about behavior management. At first, they're all kind of quiet and learning the tools, and they're not really masters of the tools, so they can't create too much havoc. But once they are, you'll need to learn about things like how to mute everyone, and also how to perhaps remove certain features. So just keep that in mind as you're getting more experience. The students are, and they might start being students. And practice using screen share. So at the moment, how I'm showing you this is through screen share. That's what I've tried to model here. is that I'm just sharing my screen. If I want to show something on the screen, I can just put it on my screen and bring it up. And if you have a second monitor, you can drag resources on and off the screen that you're sharing so you can have them all queued up. And if you're going to do that, also make sure that you learn about how to share audio. There's nothing worse than going to share a screen, getting into the class, pressing play on the YouTube. No one can hear it. So make sure you look at how to share audio before your first class too. And know that it's okay to go wrong. So this is perhaps to newer teachers. And communicating with students and families that, you're trying your best to learn a new skill. And when things go wrong, students like to have a joke too. So here's the one that I use is technical gremlins. So whenever something goes wrong, we blame the technical gremlins. It's something that when things go wrong, the students have something fun to point at, something fun to laugh at, and they're not all overly concerned. They're all thinking of the stories of how the gremlins are ruining the lesson. So yeah, that's my approach to that. Does anyone have any questions about using that strategy? Oh, sorry, was that a question? I couldn't hear. Apologies. Seeing you model comfort with challenge will be very good for your learners. Yeah. So yeah, I would definitely, when things go wrong, and sometimes when I'm setting up for the lesson, I will set up, even if everything's set up already, I'll be sitting there setting up, so the students know that I'm trying to figure things out. Even if it's all set up, I'll be sitting there doing something else, but telling them I'm trying to prepare all the things. So they kind of get an idea that the teacher also is preparing for this and doesn't just know it. It doesn't just appear, because they can't see you running around the classroom like they usually would. Yes, and if you tried to speak, unfortunately, I couldn't hear. So you might want to try your, we could use this strategy is if you want to talk, you could write hand up, hand up. If you like to talk, you could say hand up and I will know that you're looking to talk. So if you want to try that out, you can. So this is for those of you who might be a bit more into around organizing how your school is going to move towards the online space in terms of online lessons. I guess the first thing I want to just share with you is some background about how distance schools do online classes. And they mostly only do 2 or 3 a day classes, because it is a very tiring thing for a young person to sit and stare at a screen all day. So they only do 2. So if your school's thinking about doing 6 classes a day, you might find that students will struggle with that. Perhaps I would say start with 2 and move up. I wouldn't start with 6 and have everything break down. I hope that makes sense. And yeah, keep that in mind if you prepare for your online lesson timetable, if you have anything to do with that. Sorry, was that a question or was that just something in the background? I believe it was something in the background. That's all right. Again, if you're in anything to do with the planning, you might want to consider planning your classes where a teaching team member can come and sit in with you, because there'll be a lot of things to learn, and some of the best ways to learn is to watch someone else go through it in a bit of a slower pace. When you're actually teaching online, things seem to go a mile a minute, and by the time it's over, you can't remember what you did. So sitting in with another colleague is definitely one of the things you should do really early on, just to see how it works. And also, you need to be aware that online classrooms go along with flipping the classroom. I assume most of you are already planning for this, but just try and figure out the specific task that could be done in groups or have something to do with talking or sharing. Don't go through reading or activities that are basically individualized, because they could be better done by you making a video and just sending it out. Most of your software that you're using will let you record. You can just go to your online class, record, and then send out that recording. That's how I would do something like that. Rosalie says team teaching can be really helpful too, especially in the early stages of implementation of virtual lessons. Yes, I agree. And team teaching would be where two teachers sit in front of the same class, or perhaps they're both working at the same time, like me and Sam are. So if something was to go catastrophically wrong with this session, Sam could take over and assist me in that way. And excuse me, Colossa. Can I please get you to mute? I can just hear a lot in the background. Thank you.
Well, that's good. You need some me?
I'll have to do that. Colossa might be
I
distracted.
know. Smells amazing. You're running.
Woohoo! There we go. All right, so can we still hear me? Can I get some Y's in the chat if you can still hear me? Okay, thank you very much. Yes, and I guess a strategy that I haven't included this, but you might want to consider is that sometimes we use a strategy that's like a truck driver. When you want to talk, Sam, for example, would press the microphone on and say, Sam here, then talk, and then Sam out, or like that kind of CB radio kind of approach, so the students don't just leave their microphones on, because after 2 or 3 of those students having their microphones on, it does get quite noisy. And all I did then was I just muted everyone. Sometimes it can be easier just to mute everyone than to try and figure out exactly where the noise is coming from, and then you can put your microphone back on. And you will find that some students will keep putting their microphones back on because they really do, they like to just sit there with it on. But if you can, in your program, be able to force mute so they can't put it back on. Let me read the chat. Sam says, some of them will be twisting their chairs and all sorts. Correct. Bree says, find it helpful when there's another teacher in the virtual classroom monitoring, answering the questions in the chat. Yeah, so it is sometimes difficult to look at the chat. My technique is I go and I read the chat in full if there's a question, because there are some students who aren't that quick at reading. So I find saying it verbally lets them catch up with the chat as well. But it really depends on the context. If students are just writing the chat, I wouldn't read it out. But if I've asked a question and I'm looking for feedback, I would read it all out if I expect them to have seen it. Oh, apologies. Let me get this away. So online lessons, so with a flip in the classroom, but if you have, so for example, if your school isn't prepared for an entirely flipped curriculum, because I assume most schools won't be, what I'd say is definitely consider just picking 1 or 2 activities from your textbook or curriculum that you've already got to do in class. Don't try and rewrite the whole curriculum to be an online curriculum. Just go through what you would, put most of it for them to do in their own time, and pick 1 or 2 of the activities from the week and make that the online lesson. That's definitely a more approachable way rather than trying to write an online only curriculum, because that's just, to be honest, even at a virtual school, it's like a full-time thing, is fixing the curriculum, getting the curriculum to work. We often just revert back to which one of these activities will we do in our class today? Okay, here we go. So just some other considerations that you might want to think for your class, but also for the school if you're in a discussion about this. Firstly, are you planning on recording the online lessons? And if students go on webcam or microphone, sometimes they feel uncomfortable about being recorded and they don't participate as much. Some of you might kind of know if you're on webcam and it's being recorded, you're like, I don't want to go on webcam. It's kind of, you have to consider the balance of, is it better to have a class that's better for the students who are there and not being recorded, or perhaps better for the people watching later, but worse for the students there? I usually trend towards trying to get all the students to participate in class and be a better experience for them. But obviously your school have its own unique approach. Yes, Sam? I see hands
Sam
up.
here. I do feel quite strongly about this one, so I thought I'd speak up. A lot of students reach out and ask for recordings, and my first response is, well, of course I'll consider it, but are there any particularly compelling reasons why you can't come to class? Because you can't interact with the recording, unfortunately. And if you have questions, you can't just immediately, here's my cat, you can't immediately ask those questions, and I can't immediately answer them for you, and it's a shame for you to miss out on the experience. So you really want people to be committed to class, and experience shows that you can post recording links, but the view rate is not high. So keep that in mind.
Thank you, Sam. Also, if you have younger students, it might be worth considering as you go and set up all of your links to your rooms and that, is it better to just have one link where the teachers move around in the link and the students only need to manage one link, or should you move around inside of all of your links? Or you get the students to go to a different link for every class. For young students, it can be quite difficult for them to manage all of these different things to do, even with their parents' help. And remember that I'm not sure if you have all got into this depth, but there's something called alternate hosts, where each room that you set up will probably be able to have 4 or 5 other teachers as alternate hosts. Perhaps you could put a member of your teaching team or school leadership in that to support other people who might be helping your class out. And if you do have alternate rooms, it can be important to talk with your school or your teaching teams or in your cohort, like year levels. What do you want the names and passwords to be for the class? You need to make sure that one of the biggest hurdles is if your program has a password to get into classes. There's nothing worse than a student emailing you after class saying, I was there, I just didn't know how to get in because the password wasn't there, even if it was put in a huge letters next to it. So I'd recommend making the same password for basically every class so you can get in and not have that hurdle. And discussing the class rules, so how do students go to bathroom and how do students use the microphone? So it can be important to know, like, students will be more, they won't ask to go to the bathroom if you don't give them an instruction that you can ask. They'll just run away and you quickly do it. So it can be worth just discussing things like that. What happens if something happens in my house? How do I communicate with that with you? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through this lesson plan that looks like what a lesson plan for online teaching might look like. So in the resources tab, I'm going to online lesson plan. I'm going to go to .pdf. Thank you very much. Okay, so what I've done is I have put the learning attention success criteria. So what I've tried to do is I've tried to model a lesson that you might want to do in your first class. And I've put it against Year 4 curriculum standards, just so you can get the idea of how perhaps you might fit this into your teaching and learning sequence for English. So the intentions to communicate with my teacher in the online classroom, ask questions. I can share my microphone and webcam, and I can submit my thoughts on the online space and reply to my teacher's feedback. So when I'm preparing, I like to write out what I'm going to need, perhaps on the other window or behind the windows. So communicating with students and parents about login details information. Even if you've told them, students are going to perhaps communicate with you by email or phone 30 seconds before class and say, what's my password to log in, even though they've been doing it all year. Just keep that in mind, that you might want to just have that ready for that. And also prepare where you want students to submit their work. Even if it's just some blank submission things that perhaps you will be able to send students to in the middle of a class if you need something for them to submit, so you can receive it during the class. It can be good to just have something. So Google Doc could be great if you use Google. You can just send them to a Google Doc. They can start filling it in. If there's an unplanned, like you're having a discussion and you're like, it'd be good if we could chat about this. So for example, the way that I do lesson plans is teacher and student. So the teachers, so for example, I've got the links in the lesson plan and I've got it sitting there. So if I click it, it will pop up with what we're doing today. Whoops, gotta go back. Control plus. And I've also got what the students will do. So it's really important that when you're doing an online lesson that the students aren't always just responding in chat. Sometimes it can be a bit of like in your planning, it can be hard to think outside of the students are responding, they're in chat. But sometimes you need to think about how you're actually getting the assessment out of that by getting them to write into, yes, Control plus when screen sharing, make those words big. And also, if you aren't familiar with this, if you press F11, I'll just show you, F11 will make things full screen like this. So as you're going, if you're sharing something and you think your students might not be able to read it, if you press F11, it will make everything huge for them, which can be a really good tip for them, or tip for you to help them. So What you'll need to do is if you have a video, this is what I was speaking of before, make sure that you have set the audio up. If you find for some reason the audio is not working, my first tip is sometimes the screen sharing software likes to protect everyone's hearing. So sometimes you have to take your headphones off and crank the volume so they can hear it, because it does dampen it a bit. So you might just want to keep that in mind if they can't hear it and there's no reason. Otherwise, just send them the link and just take the time for them to watch it, and you just sit there with the microphone muted. Okay, so this is a strategy that I use is when students, when you give an instruction, so everyone log on to style, for example, I will tell students, if you get stuck, write the word help in chat. And this is one of those things that was on the emoji sheet. So if they're stuck, they just write the word help and they know that I will help them. Okay, so that can be useful as you're trying to give an instruction and you're sitting there waiting. Perhaps the student is stuck and doesn't know how to let you know, and they're just going to keep trying over and over. So I tell them to write help if they get stuck. So for example, when the student does a short answer response, what I've done is, so for example, I will send them off to what they will do. This is just what I use. I use a style. They will work in here as they're doing it. So the important thing here is I will give them working time. So that means as it's in my lesson plan that there is a silent time. So I'm not going to talk for 4, 5, maybe if it's an older year level, 10 minutes. You're going to work for 10 minutes. There's going to be no microphone speaking. And that's because if you have students who are working and then you talk on the microphone, the students who aren't so good at focusing will come back and just pay attention to you and ignore their work. So it's good if you have a system where you can respond to them on their work, on the actual LMS, or learning management system, or if you're using Schoolbox or Style or any of those things, respond to them via words on there, but don't use the microphone unless you need to, because they will all start tuning into your words and forget about what they were doing. It's like you're talking into everyone in the class's ear directly. It can be really distracting for them. And also giving the students the instruction that during this time, if you need help, write help in the chat. Don't just go on the mic and say, I need help, I need to do this thing, because it will distract the whole class. So Sam has said, if you like doing a lot of talking, like me, make screencast videos and send those out in your course materials. Yes, Sam, thank you. Okay, another important thing is you might want to put directly on your lesson plan where you want the eyes of the learner. This can be important because sometimes you'll forget that. So students come back to the screen share as an explicit instruction because they might still be looking at their style and you're doing all this great stuff on the webcam and they can't even see it. So it can be important to tell the students, don't have the other window up, come back to the window where I'm working or showing you the thing. And also if you want a time where you want the voice chat to be used, make sure you put that in your lesson plan too, because it can be all too easy to just say in the chat, what do you think? Sometimes you need to break it up and remind yourself, don't just fall back to the easiest option, which is always chat, because they can put it in without even, they can just put the most minimum thing and you will just be, oh, they participated. Sam says, direct attention traffic across the different online spaces. Direct attention traffic across different online spaces. Yes, thank you, Sam. Okay, so you'll be able to, I'll give you the link to this so you'll be able to go through this, but essentially I've just gone through some things that I think are important to have in your lesson plan as you prepare for your online class. Yes, okay, back to what I was looking at before, down. And you'll notice that the reason I'm doing this screen share like this is just to model that essentially all this is down here. If you want yourself on the screen share, all I did was view my own webcam and put it onto the screen share. That can be a way to put your face into whatever you're sharing if you think that's important for your learners. Okay, so getting to this is the end. After this, you can ask some questions and we can help you directly if anything you're a bit concerned about. But here's my last, tips to make you and the learners feel more comfortable is don't rush and keep track of the time. Well, Bill has put, Putting the student interaction in the lesson plan is a good idea at the beginning to help you visualize what the students are going to be doing during the lesson. Yes, thank you, Bill. It's better to end early and on a good note than to go over and the students wanting to tune out during the class. So if you have an activity, don't just go over because there's no school bell. Otherwise, students will start resenting going to your class and might tune out next time. It's better to have a positive experience than an experience they might get bored with. So my second tip is give the students time to answer. So 3 seconds there's some research on this. I can show you after the session. It's on the website. But there's 3 seconds or more. And when you're using a program, you might need to add the time to get into the program. But when I ask a question, generally I go, so for example, I just said, Sam, what will they be doing? And it gives learners that chance to actually realize that I've actually asked a question and I'm not just ranting on, and it was more of a rhetorical question than a question I want them to actually answer. I hope that makes sense. And also planning the working time. This is perhaps the most important thing, because I know that most people, when they teach online, will have this tendency to just keep talking and filling that gap. But you need to think of, when you commit to the no microphone time, it's really important to actually stick with it. I usually explicitly give the instruction to my learners, not just for them, but for me, because it can be hard to actually stop and think like, okay, they're meant to be working. I need to be quiet. You'll all experience this. Just keep that in the back of your mind. I need to be quiet. It can be very hard. Okay, well, that's all I have for today in terms of the slides and the presentation. But I would like to point you towards the resources, and I will hang around in case you have any questions. There's the resources, so you can go in and get the emoji codes. I would say if you have some students you think might have some trouble with the social interactions on the online space, getting them to print their emoji codes off means that they will be able to handle the chat a bit better. But does anyone here have any questions they would like to talk about? Thank you, Jackie. No questions? That's okay. Thank you, Sam. Clap, clap.
Am I on mic? I can't tell.
Yes, so I'll answer speaking, then I'll go back to Dot. So go ahead speaking.
I was wondering about like class sizes.
Yes.
Like I don't really, we've got we're quite a small school, and so I'm not really sure there hasn't been really any clear direction on whether we'll be timetabling for our usual classes with 15 to 25 kids, or whether we'll be putting like all of the humanities together, for year 7, all of the English together for year 7, where there's like 70 kids or more.
I can give you perhaps a bit of the information about how the virtual schools and distance schools do it across Australia. Most of them, so that's South Australia, New South Wales and Victoria, only have about 15 to 20 students per class. They don't have large classes, and because I would recommend only having 1 or 2 classes per day for students, it means you can split them in half. You'll have a bit more time to do sessions with your learners. So I would say go small classes and only 1 or 2 a day, because it will be, and take the time where they're learning and flip it, make it the blended learning where they're working by themselves. So I would say small classes, only a few a day. And if you have more than 20 in a room, it becomes unmanageable. There'll be too many students in the class that will get lost. There'll be 5 or 6 that will really stand out, and you'll just be answering them. Then the other 40 will go as like silent watchers. So I would say small classes, so you can actually engage with each person. Dot says, I want to ask where was the one above? That was Dot says, do I have a favorite easy to use poll site? Well, I personally, because I'm a science teacher, I use Style. If you're not a science teacher, I believe style is given everyone access. If you have it at your school, I would recommend that. That's really handy for me. But there's also Padlet, I think, is pretty good if you want. How do I write Padlet? Or a program called Nearpod are good. But I would say that style is probably the easiest one to use because you can see the answers live. And that's the one I would use if I was going into a class. Okay, let me go back up. I guess this is a continuation of the last one. I want to ask a multiple choice question at the start of every lesson and do A, B, C, or D, or E, and the students choose so they without each other using it. Yeah, so if your school uses style, I would look into that. That will do that feature well. That's what I would use as a science teacher, and it's available for everyone this term. So this is 10,000. I apologize, I forgot your name. It was Brad, I think. Sorry, I forgot. Definitely made me feel better about doing this next term. Thank you, so helpful. That is okay, 10,000. You're welcome. Menti is really good too. Yes, I don't have that much experience with Menti, but I do know that Menti can be good, but you just have to be aware. I think Menti only lets you put a few questions and you have to erase them every class. So just keep that in mind when you're running all your classes. Menti is a good one. I agree. Is there any other questions? Rose, do you know if students are still typing on question or answer, but you want to move on? What's your strategy? Well, usually depending on if I am doing just a quick question, one thing, especially if you have slow learners, it can be good to ask perhaps questions in a 2-stage, like I'm going to ask you to respond. And if you're not done, you can just put like N for not done, and then you can go back to writing your question out. But most of the time when I have perhaps the longer term, so the 4-minute or 5-minute breaks, I give little indications in the chat of how long you have left. And I also let students know that you don't need to put the perfect answer in. It's imagine if you were calling it out in class, sometimes you'll be wrong. So it's kind of getting students to know that they don't need to put the perfect answer in. I think that's perhaps the main thing about timing is you need to go along with your lesson plan, but remind them that they don't need to spend forever getting the perfect answer, because some students will head off as soon as you ask a question. They will head off to Google. So perhaps letting them know it's not about Googling it. It is just about giving me what's in your brain right now, and if it's wrong, we will work on it. Okay. Any other questions from anyone?
Sorry, Sam here. Yeah, I suspend the normal rules of spelling and grammar also for the chat. We definitely just want them to speak top of the brain without too much hesitation and self-checking and just get things out. And Dot, if you're still there, what platform are you going to be using for your online classes, or you're not sure yet?
Teams.
Well, that's great. Because if you're doing your classes in Teams, you can also do your ACs, you can do your, course materials. You can also run really, really great polls in Teams. And you can do that thing where it doesn't show the answers until you want everyone to see them. It can tell them if they're right or wrong, or you can do an open response. There's a ton of options in there.
Cool. Yeah, I just jumped over to Teams and had a little poke around. Is it Forms or is it something else?
Okay, so Forms is handy because you can mix up a few questions into one sort of object.
Yeah, I've used Forms before.
That they can interact with. But I also recommend a little plugin called Poly. And it's a little bit more it's a little bit more snappy looking, and it's got like a little dashboard and everything, and so you can aggregate answers over time to polys that you've run. So I really like Poly a lot. And
awesome.
And Forms is obviously great too. Yeah.
Great. I'll have a look into Poly. Thank you so much.
That's all right.
Oh, well, thank you, Dot. Is there any other questions? More than happy to hang around and answer questions that people have. I know it's probably a million questions. It's probably about what question don't you have? So good. All right. Well, it seems that perhaps we're all done. If you would like to email me after the session, I'll send you out an email that includes my email. If you would like to ask any questions that you think over the next couple of weeks before you have to get into your online classes. Other than that, thank you everyone for coming along today. My last piece of thing is I'm going to thank everyone individually for coming and sign you off. That's how I end all my classes. So thank you 09, thank you 10,000, thank you Bill, thank you Bree, thank you Dee, thank you Colossa, thank you Dot, thank you Gail, thank you Jackie, thank you Paul, thank you Rose, thank you Sam for coming. I hope you all have a great break and look forward to having a state full of online teachers with me. All right. Bye. No worry, Dot. Thanks for coming. Good night, Sam. Thank you for coming and assisting.
That's all right, Jordan. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, Paul. See you later.